What's the first ghost story that you remember? One that left marks, if not scars, that gripped you with the singular chill of mortality introducing itself. Mine came by the way of my maternal grandmother, one for whom the words colorful and strange don't begin to do it justice. A more than apt stand-in for the archetype of the crone, one of the mythology's eternal guides to the underworld. The former head of the WPA's music division and a charter member of the OSS in London during World War II, Betty Lawson Calhoun was brilliant, complicated, and an inveterate fabulist. Her family were city folks out of Troy, New York, until the Spanish flu pandemic devastated the country in 1918, and Thomas Lawson decided to move his wife and 2 young daughters to the country. So, to Betty's ghost story. 2 local laborers, hill folk, staggering back up the mountain after a payday pub crawl in town, a weekly ritual, encounter something uncanny. Full moon, clear, still night, early fall, with the whisper of winter in the air. As the men approach a small cow pond on the right, a desperate, loud, lowing moan fills them with fear. And then, hovering above the water in the moonlight, a glowing apparition that, in their pickled minds, assumes the shape of a struggling human form. The 2 drunks sprint home in terror, instantly sober, pledging to reform their ways. 10 years earlier, the body of a young woman, a murder victim, had been floating in that pond. Betty offers this as a throwaway, a punchline, the end. I didn't take it that way. A real person died in that water. She never mentioned a name, and when pressed, remembered no details. As time passed, without knowing a single fact about this young woman, or if the story was entirely invented, the image of that poor, forgotten soul lodged in the corner of my mind. 2 years later, in California, that feeling hit much closer to my life. While away at boarding school in Canada, a girl that I knew well was assaulted and killed by a deranged young man. As time passed, and I learned more about the pervasive threat of sexual violence that women face on an everyday basis, these 2 dreadful events coalesced in my mind. 25 years later, these conflated memories found fictional life as Laura Palmer in the television series Twin Peaks, which I created with David Lynch, or rather Laura Palmer became a way to explore and explain what might have happened to that lost girl in the pond. After the show went off the air, I bought a place on that lake myself and began spending summers there for the first time in decades. It turned out that a fellow that I had known since childhood had been equally obsessed with the story, and for years had been digging to learn more. The ripples that this murder had created in that still water have continued to radiate around the world for 100 years. She was real, and she had a name. 20-year-old Hazel Drew, beautiful, blonde, and connected to a number of powerful men, died in the pond that one hot July night in 1908. She was a local girl who'd moved to the city, encountered a new way of life, and got caught up in the fast lane. Her story became a regional and then a national scandal. Even Betty's tall tale of the 2 drunks 10 years later, mistaking a lost calf for Hazel's ghost, turned out to be true. I think of her whenever I pass Teal Pond. This book is a monument of remembrance for all of our Hazels, to their lost and stolen lives. Dusk descends on the mountain of Taberton, though inside the woods it is already darkening. Listen, and you can hear the humming of insects. The cricket frogs call to her, like marbles clicking. The night is frightfully hot and still, though she shivers as an invisible gust of heat brushes past her, bending the patchy grass on the roadside as it sputters along and dies. Watch out for water snakes, she remembers. She has seen them here before. Scaly, greenish-brown serpents with round heads, button-like eyes, and slender, banded bodies. "Am I doing the right thing?" a voice in the back of her head tugs, but she manages to quash it. The morning before last, she had woken up in the same bed she had almost every morning for the past 5 months, rising to the same melodies of chirping birds and the same view of the handsome homes across Whitman Court in fashionable East Troy. Now, all that seems a distant memory. She had left her parents as a teenager, and over the past 5 years lived with and worked for 3 different families. But she wasn't going to be a domestic servant, toiling away for the elite of Troy forever, washing clothes and dishes and picking up after others' children. She had overcome her share of obstacles in life already. She had made plans that would see them through, whatever lay ahead. She was ready for it. She was fearless. The fortune teller just warned her that she would die a sudden death before the year's end. Hadn't she simply just laughed it off, the dire prediction of? Just then she hears a sound, a rustling in the trees. Campers? A drunken lumberjack? Probably just a deer or a rabbit. She squints, peering deeper into the woods, but it is getting darker by the minute and she can't make anything out. Many women her age would have been spooked by Taberton this time of evening. Stories abounded of all dangers in these woods. Still, Hazel isn't afraid. She knows these woods intimately, every twist and turn. She grew up in woods like these not far from here, and visited often when her family lived nearby, as a refugee from all the pressures of her life. The air smells of damp grass and rich dirt. She inhales slowly, savoring it. What does it remind her of? Home. She pauses to remove her black straw hat and stares briefly at the ostrich plumes. Her hair has dampened and matted in the heat. How many men had complimented her on her radiant blonde hair and her glittering blue eyes? As the moon continues its ascent into the sky, she is suddenly overcome with weariness. She collects herself, clearing those thoughts from her mind, and continues to trudge up the hill. Destiny awaits her just around the corner. She hears the screeching of an owl, and then another rustling sound. Someone is here. In the summer of 1908, the resort town of Sand Lake in Rensselaer County, New York, was busy. The usual population of around 2,000 made way for holidaymakers, and the July temperature was climbing. However, the visiting families would soon be joined by reporters and investigators when the body of a woman turned up in Teals Pond. 20-year-old Hazel Drew was born on a farm in East Posenkill. At 14, she left to work in the home of an affluent family, eventually becoming a governess. Described as fair, blue-eyed, and beautiful, the young woman worked hard and was liked by everyone. Hazel was last seen 4 days earlier by Frank Smith, a teenager who had worked at a nearby farm, and Rudolph Gundrum, a charcoal peddler in his mid-30s. Around 7:30 p.m., Frank had hailed Rudolph for a ride in his wagon, and the two of them saw Hazel for the last time. Frank had an unrequited love for the young woman, whose appearance and personality lured many young suitors, wanting to get to know her, and she was very popular around the town. When Hazel was found, she was floating face down in the river. She was bloated and her skull had been crushed by an unidentified object. Her lungs were empty of water, meaning that she was dead before she hit the lake, and she was unrecognizable due to being in the water for 4 days. Hazel was eventually identified for her gold fillings and clothing, and as the investigation into her death began, the details of her life started to come to light. Just days before her murder, Hazel had resigned from her position in the mayor's home. Her reason, to this day, remains unknown, but she was given the rest of her pay for the time that she had worked, and she left the house. She had told relatives that she planned to travel, but to her exact movements were never revealed. Hazel was also living well outside of her means. She was traveling first class into New York City and to Rhode Island, dining at expensive restaurants and staying in luxury hotels. Her new clothing was also far too expensive for a woman who just worked as a house staff and earned $3 a week. According to her friends and family, there wasn't a man in Hazel's life, but they likely knew more than they were saying. Hazel's aunt refused to help the police and told many of Hazel's friends to do the same. However, when questioned, Hazel's friend, Carrie Weaver, told investigators that Hazel had a way to make her money go further than most people, and she likely just saved all her earnings. In May, just a few months earlier, Carrie and Hazel took a trip to New York where they attended the theater. They ate at lavish restaurants and stayed at a boarding house, despite Hazel losing her purse. Carrie said that the pair never met any men while they were there, but Hazel had been to the city earlier in the month on her own. On the way home from New York, Hazel told her friend that she was going to spend the 4th of July holiday at Lake George, presumably with a man. When Independence Day weekend came, Hazel didn't go to the lake and instead spent the holiday with her aunt. Detectives had searched through Hazel's minimal belongings and found a number of postcards and letters from friends. There was also correspondence from a man with initials as C.E.S. The 6 letters that he wrote were loving. Your merry smile and twinkling eyes torture me, and your face haunting me. Why can't I be contented again? You have stolen my liberty. Please don't forget a promise to write. When I reach Albany again, I will meet you there at the tavern. I must see you soon, or I will die of starvation. Hazel's friends and family told investigators that they didn't know anyone with the initials of CES, and the person was never identified. However, on the 6th of July, Hazel was seen waiting for a young, tall man at the train station. The witness claimed that the man had a very controlling behavior over Hazel, but again, he was never identified. Investigators had few leads to go on in the murder case that was beginning to capture the nation. Frank Smith was initially a suspect in the case because of his secret love for Hazel. The teenager was described as dim-witted and an easy suspect in the case. However, Frank had an alibi and multiple witnesses for the night of the murder and was quickly ruled out. Another suspect in the death was Hazel's uncle, William Taylor. He owned a nearby farm, and although he was described as odd, there was no evidence that he killed his niece, and he was also released without charge. Investigators had heard rumors about a dentist that Hazel was involved with, and according to the Evening Word, inquiries into 30 to 40 dentists throughout Troy, New York began. According to Hazel's friend, Mina Jones, the dentist had asked for Hazel's hand in marriage, but his name wasn't known. According to Mina, Hazel was also attacked twice by a man long time ago, but she managed to escape, and he was never caught. Other people of interest included the real-life version of Richard Beimer's character in Twin Peaks, who lived in a nearby mansion and solicited orgies. He was initially suspected, but on the night that Hazel died, screams were coming from the Albany millionaire's house, implying that he was at home. Police spoke to Hazel's brother Willie, who told them that he believed that when she took her last walk down Taberton Road, that she was going to the farm where he was working to say goodbye to him. He said that she would never leave without seeing him, and there was no other reason for her to be traveling down that specific road. A grand jury eventually assembled, where the witnesses who had seen Hazel on the day of her murder and the days prior were brought in to give their accounts of what they had seen. There was no forensic evidence relating to any suspects. The investigation went cold. It seemed to be kind of a hastily conducted investigation, and because she was a person from not a prominent family, I think you could fairly say, and because there was very little sympathy for female victims of that sort in this time, she may have gotten the short shrift. Several decades later and 160 miles away, Mark Frost had an idea brewing. Having spent his early years vacationing in the area where Hazel's murder was infamous, his grandmother had used her death as a cautionary tale. He and David Lynch eventually used Hazel's death as inspiration for Twin Peaks, the story of a woman whose body is found by the shore of a lake. Speaking to the Washington Post, Frost said, "It was the notion of this girl's body being found on the edge of the water, the mystery remaining unsolved, and the multiple suspects. The kind of cross-cultural and different social classes of people that she interacted with, that it really struck my fancy." Though the similarities between the two women are there, the road forks at the end of their stories. Laura Palmer's killer is eventually discovered, but for Hazel Drew, there is still no resolution. A wise man once told me that mystery is the most essential ingredient of life, for the following reason. Mystery creates wonder, which leads to curiosity, which in turn provides the ground for our desire to understand who and what we truly are. Frost wrote this in his 2016 novel, The Secret History of Twin Peaks. The solution to Hazel's murder may lie forever beyond our grasp, but it's our longing for answers that makes her story more mysterious, and the story of Laura Palmer so seductive. I absolutely love Twin Peaks. I was around 15 when I watched it, and I love the mystery of it. I never knew till recently about the murder of Hazel Drew, and that Twin Peaks was inspired by an actual murder case. If you love mysteries, I would definitely suggest watching Twin Peaks. In the case of the real-life murder of Hazel Drew, Twin Peaks was a way of keeping her story out there. A very mysterious case I pray someday is solved. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments. I love you all, and I will see you next time on Tales Told in the Dark. Thank you.